Welcome, everyone. I think we're ready to get started here, and we've got a good crowd today. This is, of course, being recorded. My name is Caleb Barlow. I'm the CEO at Cyberbit, and I just want to welcome everybody to today's webinar. As we get started today, obviously, the first thing I want to do is give you a couple housekeeping items. As we go through today, if you have questions, oddly enough, you actually don't want to put those in the chat. The chat function is disabled for participants. You want to put those questions in the Q&A function. And, so if you look on the bottom of your screen, kind of a little to the right of the middle, you'll see a Q&A button. And you can ask us questions, and we'll try to answer all of those as we go through today. So obviously today we'll be talking about from certification to simulation, the new cyber revolution. And we obviously have some special guests here today. So with that, let me turn to our special guests. And first, Jess, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, yes, thanks, Caleb. So I'm Jess Byrne. I'm a principal analyst on the security and risk team at Forrester Research. I cover a number of different areas. One of them is enterprise email security. One is incident response. And then one that is very near and dear to my heart is cybersecurity talent management. So the hiring, training, and retention of cybersecurity staff. So I'm excited to be here today.
Thanks a lot, Jess. And James, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Caleb. My name is James Yarnell. I'm the Senior Director of Cybersecurity Operations at Discover Financial, leading all of our defensive security operations teams.
Well, thank you, James. So let's start the conversation off, with kind of a baseline of the market, right? We've got a cybersecurity job market that's, well, it's facing a rather unique conflict, right? On one hand, and for some time, we have this massive shortfall of talent. Today in the US, according to cyberseek.org, there's 570,000 open, unfilled cybersecurity jobs across the United States alone, and only enough workers to fill 72% of those jobs. But meanwhile, at the same time we have this, huge opening and need for talent, we have graduates that are looking to get employed in cybersecurity. They're coming out of college because this was their field of choice, but they can't get hired. At the same time, we have cybersecurity professionals being laid off. And I don't know what the numbers are there. I haven't seen good data on that, but I think it's fair to say that those numbers are well into the tens of thousands of people that are experienced security professionals that are currently out there in the market looking for jobs. So on one hand, we have this huge number of openings. On the other hand, we have people that want these jobs, but they're not connecting. And this is a problem for both higher education institutions, for companies that are looking to hire talent, and certainly, for those people looking to get a job. So let's start off, James, as a hiring manager, what's your perspective on this? What do you think is causing this somewhat unusual disconnect in the market?
Well, I think part of the problem, Caleb, is that we're seeing a lot of entry-level folks who have the knowledge or who have had the exposure, the experience to the material, but not necessarily the hands-on application of that, right? And that's one of the things that can be challenging for folks trying to enter the cybersecurity realm is I've done these courses, I've learned these things, but I haven't had the opportunity to actually put them into practice. As a hiring manager, one of the things I look for, along with the normal things, right? Educational background, experience, certifications, all that fun stuff. But the things I look for are a little different than that, and it's two things: passion and curiosity. Those are two things that are difficult to train or teach someone. But if I can get someone with passion and curiosity for cybersecurity, I can use tools and trainings that I have at my disposal, which I know we'll talk about a little bit later, to get them to the point of readiness, right? So I really think it's a matter of getting that hands-on experience and getting in the weeds with what you've learned from not just a review or theoretical perspective, but from an actual practical hands-on doing the work, being in those situations that you're going to face as a cybersecurity professional, regardless of what area of cyber you're looking for.
I think it's a really interesting point. I mean, cybersecurity at the end of the day is a novel risk. You're up against a human adversary, and that human adversary can pivot, they can jog, they can see what you're doing. I don't know. I often like to compare this to, let's say you're Delta Airlines going out to hire a pilot, right? Do you really care whether that person went to school at Harvard or the military academy or, just worked their way up through flight school somewhere? Probably not. But what you do care a lot about is, are they certified on that airframe? How many hours do they have in the seat flying that plane? And how many hours do they have in simulation practicing things that maybe they don't see in an average day, flying in a really heavy windstorm and things like that. I think in a lot of ways, cybersecurity is starting to really have that same dynamic, that we need to know that not only is someone have it, has taken classes on Splunk, but that they've actually got time in the seat working in front of a Splunk console, as an example. So let's actually show a poll here. So it's known that the cybersecurity skills shortage is causing increased workloads, and open job positions and high burnout rates. But how much do you think this is increased from 2022 to 2023? So we'll give everybody a second to kind of fill that in. You should have the poll popping up on your screen. All right, we'll end the poll in, why don't we go ahead and end the poll here? And, the answer on this, amazingly, is that in just 1 year, it's gone up by 24%. 71% of organizations reported extremely negative effects from the skill shortage in 2023. Now, I don't think that's a huge surprise to anyone. Oh, look, everybody, the vast majority of people, well, let's see. Actually, most people, 48%, thought it was from 17 to 30%. It's actually a little worse than that. So you can kind of see these poll results here. So clearly the problem is rising and having a huge impact on our workforce. Now, Jess, you identified a category that solves many of these challenges and spent a bunch of time researching this in your new Forrester Wave report. Now, this is the first time this category has really ever been studied by anybody, I think, let alone at Forrester. You want to talk a little bit about the category and why you decided to focus on it now?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, this is a huge passion area for me. And so really I came at it because we've all heard a lot about cybersecurity staffing shortages. You just talked about the numbers from CyberSeek. We see those all the time. We see ISC squared numbers about global staffing shortages. But when I speak to Forrester clients, what I hear more and more about from security leaders is not so much that they're understaffed, it's that they're underskilled, or that their team's skills don't align with the needs of the organization. Cloud security skills, I think, is a really good example. They are still in very much short supply. But in my conversations with security leaders, managers, and practitioners, I've found that the way practitioners and teams are attempting to upskill and acquire those needed security skills is sort of flawed, right? Organizations and individuals are shelling out tons of money. I'm always shocked at how much some courses cost and some test prep boot camps cost. They're shelling out tons of money on security certification test prep courses, or sending just one or two of an 8 to 10 person SOC team, for example, to a week-long boot camp. And these numbers, again, are shocking, anywhere from 6 to 10K a pop. It doesn't scale. And it's also point in time knowledge that in this day and age really can't keep up with the pace of technology change and evolving attacker techniques, right? So cloud, again, I think cloud security was a big scramble that we're still sort of getting over, and attackers are still exploiting vulnerabilities and misconfigurations in cloud environments that the teams are still trying and struggling to get their heads around. So continual practical hands-on experience is key, in my opinion. Right? A mid-career management certification attained over a decade ago, like many folks I know, it's not really a measure of the skills that security practitioners acquired over a decade on the job. And then similarly, and this is where it's kind of more of an issue, is that an early career security certification is no measure of self-taught skills and all that potential that we were just talking about that a candidate brings to the table. So as organizations really, they're facing this growing pipeline of fresh, untested talent, and they're facing a shrinking pool of mid-career professionals that are leaving for various reasons. Some of it's burnout, right? The need to verify specific skills through things like labs and exercises as part of the recruitment and hiring process, I think is critical. So I started to see all these issues, and then I started to see a rise of a very viable alternative to this point in time training, and that is the category I'm calling cybersecurity skills and training platforms, like Cyberbit itself, right? And so, and many others. And so I decided to do the first ever evaluative research of this market by an analyst firm, to my knowledge. And yes, I'm tooting my own horn on that. And I hope it opens some eyes. It's not really to toot my own horn. It's really because I want security leaders to see that there is an alternative to the costly point in time training that they're shelling out all this money, they're spending all this time with their teams on. And I hope it changed the way we approach upskilling and security talent management moving forward. So that's a very long version of why I started this research.
The other thing that strikes me in this, just as you're kind of talking here, Jess, is I think there's also a fun aspect to this too. Like,
Sure.
I just came back from, I just spent a week or two in India, and we have a client there where we're training basically 1,000 people a year. And what they decided to do was they extended their training beyond just the SOC team into, they realized that, look, everybody that works in IT needs a week of security training. So, I think there was this kind of, I don't know, it sounds so obvious when I say it now, but there was this acknowledgement that, if you think of the traditional IT security training, it's very compliance focused. It's sitting in front of a lot of very boring PowerPoint charts being told what not to do. And what this company decided to do was they said, hey, why not actually take all of our IT team through live fire exercises for a week, let them go, slay some cyber bad guys and have some fun. And it was just such an interesting experience for me, because it's not the traditional use case of this, right? If the traditional use case is SOC operators and threat hunters and all that kind of thing. But seeing this team, and they were stumbling through it because they're not security professionals, but they were having so much fun. I think that's the other aspect of this is, you get to get your hands dirty, and that's a big part of this. Now, James, talk to us a little bit, maybe at a high level, about how your organization adopted what we're doing at Cyberbit, kind of the experience of using these tools, and what that's meant for you guys.
Sure. So first of all, I love that story, Caleb. I think it's great to get non-cyber folks involved in cyber, right? And give them the opportunity to understand the work that takes place in this world and the impact it has, right? So I absolutely love that story. But the way we've kind of bought into this approach and are leveraging it is very much on the what I mentioned earlier, right? If we bring in folks who have some level of knowledge or some level of exposure, having a platform where we can put them in a situation or put them in front of an event that they hands-on have to deal with and get feedback on, right? Like that is insanely valuable. One of the other aspects of this type of platform that I love too is having the ability to map it to a framework, right? So for example, the NIST NICE framework, when it comes to skills and technical capabilities, mapping it to that framework can not only help with upskilling a particular analyst, but can also help drive the career progression of that analyst, right? When they're ready to move on to the next level or the next next pay grade or whatever the case may be. So I think that's insanely valuable. And just to get back to the hands-on piece, you mentioned a live fire exercise. So live fire exercise being an event that a group of analysts would work together, right, in a system or a network that has similar tools to what your environment has. So it's not like you're playing around on tools that you'll never touch, but it's an actual situation that you're put into and have to deal with, right? And one of the things I love about those live fire exercises is it gives our teams the ability to role play, right? Put analysts in positions where we hope they're never in, right? We hope we never have to deal with a lot of these types of situations, but having a safe environment to do it in a hands-on way with immediate feedback helps us develop that muscle memory that is so important. So when the thing does happen, when the bad day does come, they have experience and exposure to it. And it also helps us, one of my mantras is train like you fight, right? It gives us the ability to put our analysts through the paces of a real life scenario and prepares them, right? And to my earlier point about hiring folks who may not have the hands-on applicational knowledge or experience, but have the theoretical piece of it. putting them in a platform like this where they can practice that, it just opens up the hiring possibilities, right? It expands your candidate pool to where, you would have maybe not considered folks without, 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years of experience. So it does a lot of different things. I could go on and on and on, but it's been a really important enhancement to our capability set.
It's you said something in there that's really interesting, which is, you've kind of got to train like you fight. And it's funny, we got a couple of comments in the chat when I'd said at the beginning on, do you really care whether like the pilot comes out of a military academy or maybe a private sector pilot, and a couple of folks in the military are like, hey, wait a second, actually there is something different there. And I actually think they're right, which is, and I tell this story all the time, right? Like, why is boxing a required class at West Point, which is the U.S. Military Academy? It's so you know what it feels like to get punched in the face, and you know how to take on a human adversary. And I think that's something that, if we think about the boardroom in a cybersecurity incident, this concept of a human adversary, this concept that someone can pivot and jog, that's such a critical piece of this. And what I also think kind of goes to that point too, if you look at that Forrester Wave and all the companies on it, including Cyberbit, the vast majority of those companies started, the initial incubation for the idea started someplace in a military regimen or a cyber command or something like that. If you look at almost all of these companies, that's where their kind of DNA began in this, and really starting to capture that idea that, wait a second, we're up against this, kind of human adversary. Now, James, talk to us a little bit about kind of old and new approaches, right? I mean, it's not like we're all throwing the, $8,000 in-person class out the door completely. Those things still have value, but how do you complement that with what you're getting out of these, more immersive experiences in the cyber range? Like, also, I'm really curious, like, does this help you at all in the recruitment process?
Yeah. So in my eyes, there's no such thing as bad training, right? Experience and exposure are important regardless of where you get it. But there is a difference between watching a video or learning a thing in a classroom versus actually experiencing it, right? And like I mentioned earlier, with some of the benefits of things like the live fire exercises or the scenario-based trainings where it's, hands-on keyboard, you're doing the work in a simulated space similar to your own environment, but in a safe space, it's invaluable, right? You know, like I said, I advocate for any and all training that folks can get themselves exposed to. But when it comes to really wanting to, like I mentioned, develop that muscle memory to where things are just almost automatic when you're in a situation, it's really hard to beat a hands-on experience where you're going through the paces with your peers, right? And one of the other things I failed to mention earlier about the benefits of those exercises is it's not just training someone on a technical skill set or a technical thing, right? Like using this EDR or using this NDR or whatever the case may be. It's helping develop the analytical and problem solving skill sets that are so important in cyber. Not to mention in situations where you have long lasting or major security incidents or events, it gives you an opportunity to also practice that handoff, right? In those types of situations where you're working a multi-day event, maybe it's a major incident, and hoping we never have to deal with that. It's important to remember you still have to keep the lights on, right? And you still have to maintain your team's sanity in those kind of multi-hour or multi-day incidents. So being able to practice that process of handing things off as an incident commander or even just a lead analyst on a security event, that's important too, because
So,
that's, I
so it's
think,
soft
something.
skills too, then, right?
Absolutely. And some of those things you can't really learn watching a video, right? You got to be in it. You have to do it. You have to experience it to really drive it home.
Yeah, so I think we had a slide here on kind of some of the top soft skills that our employers are looking for in candidates. And, I'm curious actually, Jess, if you have any opinions on this as you were kind of looking at this space, like, how important are these soft skills as you were kind of looking at this overall?
I think they're really important, and I think what these platforms do, while not having specific, here's how to be a better written and verbal communicator, are in there. They are having people practice over and over again, collaborating with each other in simulated crises, right? Like that's, if you're putting people in a very, sweat-inducing situation, you need to understand, if are they going to snap at each other? Are they going to figure out how to work together? And maybe there are pieces of the process that have broken down that, if that is fixed, they will be able to collaborate better together. And you can't really see that. You don't want to wait until an actual incident happens to see where these processes and the communication breaks down. So I think doing something like this and getting everybody, on the incident response team, which is typically spans multiple teams. It's not just security. The people that are on this team are not all necessarily under one leader, right? There has to be, collaboration at all levels, for this to work. So, thinking about how to solve problems, how to work together, how to make sure you're documenting, everything that's happening and everything that's broken down, or coming up with new solutions once you've uncovered a problem during the process. Yeah, all of this fits into practice makes perfect, in these types of situations, and you don't get that by just, studying for an exam.
I'll throw a little funny story in here. When I had a lineage before at IBM where we built out their cyber range there, and this was an in-person range. And one of the amazing things that happened when we first built it that we never anticipated is, these are stressful situations, right? You're putting people into crisis, and like any crisis, like any stressful situation, whether that's, learning how to fire a gun, or whether that's, learning how to, deal with a brutal offense in a football game, right? Like, these are stressful situations where you get a little bit of a cortisol flush. And one of the things that baffled our minds when we first built that was when you finally got to that point where you were really putting injects into the audience that were highly stressful and caused them to make decisions between two difficult outcomes. The level of swearing in the room went through the roof. These are professionals that you know well, right? So you're sitting there in the back of the room going, did they just say that? And it became kind of almost a joke, but I mean, the thing we learned out of this was exactly this, that these soft skills, like any time in business, are critical, but in a crisis situation, they've got to be rehearsed enough that you can kind of control that, that stimulation you get, that cortisol flush that you get, to be able to work through and make decisions in a crisis, with a clean head. So, James, I'm curious of, what do you think about this, and kind of your opinions and insights on this? Because I know, in addition to kind of your day job, you also do a lot of teaching as well. And we've got a lot of educators here in the audience. Like, are these the right soft skills that you think we need to see in a graduate out of a program?
Yes, but I'll kind of caution that with it's also a learned skill, right? I wouldn't expect someone directly out of a training camp or college or institution to just be ready in that situation. That's where it's so important for organizations to have an appropriate onboarding process and training process to map what is expected of an individual in that environment, because no environment's the same, right? So there's always going to be an investment, whether it be time or money, in terms of bringing someone on board, because there's nuances to every environment, everything, even the leadership structure, right? Like, it differs from each environment. So there's always going to be that investment, but having the opportunity to give a student that exposure beforehand is just it's going to set them ahead, right? It's going to put them ahead of the class in terms of being able to onboard and be prepared and be ready to face the threats that they'll be facing. And it also helps kind of cut down that onboarding time in terms of someone being, battle ready for a situation in the cyber realm. As an adjunct myself, as you mentioned, I can't stress the importance enough on hands-on exposure, right? I know I've said it a million times in the last 20 minutes, but it's so important to not only teach the material and relay that material in a way that students will understand and relate it to real world experiences or situations that, as a adjunct that I've been exposed to, but also go in and do the work, right? Here's a lab, go complete this lab. Here's a hands-on situation that you may be faced with someday. And that, I think, just prepares them more better than anything else in terms of just being ready. Nobody's ready day one, right? But it at least helps them accelerate their readiness at a much faster pace.
The other thing I think is interesting with that, and we're seeing a lot of this, is, you've got various SOCs that are in some sort of transformation from, maybe an older legacy kind of on-prem technology to, maybe more of a cloud technology for their SIM, for their SOAR. So you might have someone, let's say, going from like Curator to Microsoft. And, it's always a challenge to go, okay, has the team made that transition? Before I actually flip the switch and it's going to matter, do I know that my team is performant on this? And I think we're seeing a lot of that kind of come into the mix as well. Now, I want to take a question here. This is from Tom. And I'm curious of both of your opinions on this. This one may be a bit controversial, but I'll throw it out there anyway. I certainly have opinions on it, but what do you think about the certification type training, right? I mean, we see lots of candidates that have a whole long list of certs behind their name versus this kind of hands-on, I've spent so many hours, in a simulator. What do you think about it now? And what do you think about where it's going? And Jess, why don't I start with you?
All right. Well, I have opinions on this.
Let's hear them.
I do think there is some benefit to certifications. It's certainly, with the way the hiring process is going right now, and I think this also plays into an earlier question. It's a foot in the door, right, for people to get in. But when I did research on cybersecurity certifications, as experience increases, the value of certifications it decreases for those practitioners. So, I think experience, which also comes with hands-on learning, sort of trumps that. I think in terms of this question, if we have something like a cybersecurity skills and training platform like Cyberbit, how much additional do we need? Oftentimes, these platforms uncover skills gaps. And if there are some very specific, DFIR, offensive security certifications out there that I think, are worth pursuing. And I think cybersecurity skills and training platforms can actually help prepare for those certification exams. But overall, in my book, the general certifications that people have sort of been relying on as just a checkbox as part of the hiring process, I don't feel are valuable or at all indicative of someone's experience, their proficiency in specific domains, and their ability to do the job. And I've heard from so many security leaders, and I'm really interested in hearing James's perspective on this, that yes, I brought somebody on, they had every acronym in the book next to their name and title, and they still need a large amount of training for our specific environment. They don't understand how to actually do the work. As a practice, they understand, a specific tool, but it's not implemented in the same way in this organization. And so that trips them up. And so therefore the rest of the team is like, oh, thanks. This isn't helpful. Right now, this person is not helping us be more productive. We're still burned out. So again, I think they have to be applied judiciously and very, very targeted in order to be helpful.
James, what do you think?
I couldn't agree more. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I think there's a place for any and all training, right? And I'll never dismiss an opportunity for either myself or anybody on my team to learn from something, right? But to that point, it has seemed like some of these certifications have become check boxes, as you mentioned, Jess. It can be frustrating at times because on paper everything looks great, but then in practice or during a technical screening for a new hire, it's like, wait a minute, there's a disconnect here, right? And that's why I think it's so important to just look at the individual holistically versus how many cert do they have CISP, do they have Sec Plus, do they have this and that? No, what have you done? Why do you care? Why do you want to be in this field? What drives you? And that brings me back to the passion and curiosity. What do you do outside of all these structured trainings and things to maintain awareness of what's happening, right? The latest vulnerabilities, the latest advancements in tools, and things like Gen AI that's impacting the cyber world, right? So it's more than just, this person has a degree and has this cert and that cert, so thumbs up, right? No, it's more than that. It's how have you applied that knowledge? Can you speak to it? Can you perform it? And that's where having a platform where you can, both from an assessment perspective before hiring someone can be leveraged, but then afterwards, it's a little easier to again expand your candidate pool to where it's not just, I need somebody with these things. Like, no, you need somebody who cares and is going to, who has the drive and has the passion to do the work. And that's one of the things we uncover, and on my team in terms of recruiting is, what do you do to stay up with the latest, right? And not everybody needs to have an elaborate lab in their home or their office or basement or whatever, but you know, are you putting in the work because you just want a paycheck, or are you putting in the work because you care and it's interesting and you're passionate about it? And those are kind of intangible until you know ask those questions and look at the full picture and not just a paper resume.
Yeah.
So
I think this is
Jess,
great. Yeah.
there's this whole dialogue around what's broken, and actually we've got some really good questions in the chat, right? Both, what's broken when the misalignment with recruiters' expectations, and what's broken with, okay, we know how people need to get trained, but why isn't it happening, right? You want to talk a little bit about what you found there as you were doing this research?
Yeah. So in this research and in research that I did beforehand, I found that, the hiring process is sort of, I think security leaders are incredibly busy, right? So a lot of the recruitment process, both internal and external, is left to their partners in HR, right? And so that often means it's left to applicant tracking systems, which are extremely rigid, right? And they don't really take into account, they're looking for that acronym soup, right? They're looking for all of those markers, and people are getting rejected, right, outright if they didn't have a specific set of certifications. There was one CISO, a good friend of mine, who had to make a change with HR by applying for his own job. He asked them to put his job in there, his job description, and he got rejected, right? He got rejected for it because it didn't meet all of the requirements that they had put in there. And I think that happens a lot, right? So I think when I advise folks to look, especially recruiting internally, I think platforms like cybersecurity skills and training platforms are incredible for internal recruiting. If you're able to open up a few spots for people to play around, you're going to find hidden talent in development. You're going to find hidden talent at the help desk. You're going to find hidden talent in HR, maybe themselves, right? Or in facilities or somewhere around there where somebody has a passion for this outside of work. And this is the way you get in. And there's no reason not to bring that person on if they have institutional knowledge and, curiosity and eagerness. So that's what needs to get fixed. We need to move away from degree and certification requirements and start looking for aptitude and eagerness and proficiency. And if we can get past that, and I know that's tough in some situations, especially things like the U.S. military, many U.S. governmental agencies still rely on a pretty rigid certification requirement process. But again, I think where these platforms come in handy is that you can actually do skills-based hiring. You can send out a lab for somebody to do, and there isn't a right or wrong answer, but you can look at their thought process as to how they solve that problem in the lab. And if you like the way they think, maybe for an early career role, you take a chance on that person. So yeah, I think that needs to get fixed.
It's interesting. I mean, we obviously, this platform's used a lot in recruitment, and I always find it interesting because someone will come to us and they're like, "Oh, hey, we're running a search for a specific SOC operator. There's 3 people we want to run through, a series of scenarios," and then so they just tack on an extra license or 2, go off, run them. A week later, like, yeah, we need 3 more. A week after that, yeah, we need 3 more. We haven't we looked at the resumes, they made it through the interviews, and they said they were really proficient at this skill. Then we put them through the paces and they couldn't get there, right? And the interesting thing with that is, on one hand, okay, that extends your recruiting process on the one hand, but on the other hand, what you're saving in terms of paying recruiters to go back and refine somebody after you've got to move them out because they actually didn't have the skill that you need is huge. So, James, this brings us to a question that's coming up in the chat a bit. David was asking this question along with a few others. So, okay, so you're using this cyber range, you're upskilling your team. How do you measure the impact?
Sure. So, first of all, there's metrics and scoring within the platform itself, right? So that you can see how someone is doing on a particular lab or exercise. I mean, that's pretty straightforward, right? Understanding where their strengths and their weaknesses are from that perspective. But in a live fire type situation where it's many analysts working together on a bigger event that's being facilitated and led or helped by the cyberbit person as well, it you get a sense of where we struggle, right? And it's not, it may not be as direct as like data points on a grid, right? Like, well, they stumbled on EDR because it took 20 minutes to figure this piece out. It's more of the feedback process that we have with the facilitator, as well as the leadership who attends those live fires as well, to notice those nuances, to notice those things. Well, man, we really took a lot longer to figure out where this traffic came from. That's an opportunity for us to go back to our security operations center to put an enhanced focus on, that work stream, right? Or, man, we really fumbled with the handoff to the incident response team. Now we have a direct action we can take to reinforce that process and test it maybe outside of the platform, and it gives us an opportunity also to beef up our processes and do reviews in that way. So it's kind of a mixed bag. I love that question, but it's kind of a mixed bag, right? Like in the platform itself, we'll see metrics and data based on how someone is performing on particular exercises and labs, but in those like live fire exercises, we get to see directly firsthand as a leader where our team is excelling and where our team is maybe struggling a bit more. So, as part of the lessons learned or the review after the exercise, we can tighten those things up accordingly. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think that was great, and we showed some examples there. And this is something we probably should have mentioned earlier. I saw this in the chat. A couple people were asking, "Hey, where do I get this research that Jess put together?" And I don't know why we didn't put that at the start of all this, but probably the easiest place to get it is if you just go out to literally cyberbit.com. You'll see it right on the front page of the website. You can fill out a little form and just download it for nothing. So anyway, that's how
I'll
you get
throw a
it.
few of my blog posts in the chat too that deal with some
Oh,
of
that
the
would be
items
great.
that are in front of Forrester's paywall, because I know we do have a paywall. So I'll throw some of those in there as well.
The other thing too, if someone could throw this in the chat, a couple people are asking what the source is of that soft and power skills chart that we showed. If someone could throw that in there as well, that would be great. And by the way, if you have questions, it's not in the chat. Press the Q&A button. You can ask us a question. We'll keep trying to work through those as we go here, and it's always more fun for us when we get to get questions from out there. So, okay. So we've got a bunch of cybersecurity, leaders on the line, Jess. They're kind of like, all this sounds great. This is all wonderful. And frankly, I don't even think this is just, kind of in the realm of, your CISO. This is also in the realm of universities. Like, okay, this is great. Where do I get the budget for this? How do I justify this? What do you think, Jess?
Yeah, so this has been interesting for a number of things, right? There's such a move toward tech consolidation, and I think skills and training sort of stands apart from this. Actually, email does in its own way as well. But my colleague, Jeff Pollard, who's VP Principal Analyst at Forrester, we write a lot for CISOs, and he wrote a report and actually gave a talk at our Security and Risk Forum last year on the CISO's Guide to Winning Every Budget Battle. And I love this, and I use it a lot myself, and it makes the case that security leaders need to do a better job explaining how cybersecurity actually and spending in cybersecurity drives revenue. And that cuts to the security program directly affect relationships and requirements with three key constituencies. And a lot of this works, I think, pretty well across most private sector companies. And that is customers, cyber insurance carriers, and regulators, right? Customers aren't going to trust or do business with companies that don't protect their data. They're going to turn to your competitors. Cyber insurance carriers are going to refuse coverage or raise premiums if you don't meet their requirements, and regulators are going to remove your ability to sell into specific markets or operate in specific markets if your posture falls below a certain threshold. So defend your security budget by quantifying the investments in those security controls, right? And how much revenue is generated from systems that those controls protect. So cybersecurity can become a profit center when customers, insurers, and regulators require it. So where does training fit in? Where do training platforms fit in? Well, you've got to link them to the skills required to maintain those controls. Link them again to demonstrable incident readiness. Show that you are ready for whatever is coming your way, and state that investment in upskilling security staff supports the requirements of all three of these key constituencies. Really link security skills and training, along with other technology and security tech investments, to the cost of doing business, because it is. We're seeing what happens when it's not tied to the cost of doing business. We've seen a lot of really interesting breaches in the past year where the customer and others have been forgotten in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a question coming in from Allison, really talking about, okay, with this shift that we're seeing with hands-on education being more important, and James, maybe this is one you can kind of touch on. Like, okay, so I go in, I get more education, I get more hours in a range, I've practiced and rehearsed, I've done things in a different way. How do I market myself to go get that job where the recruiters are going to see me and realize that, hey, I don't just have a certification, but I can prove I've actually done this and done this at scale? What do you think?
Yeah, I love that question, because it comes up quite a bit with a lot of the folks that I mentor, both in my professional capacity and as an adjunct. It's really don't it's simple. Don't sell yourself short. If you've done the work and you've gone through the paces and have done those hands-on labs or experiences or have attended those boot camp, like, represent yourself a little bit better, right? Don't just put on your resume that I did this training, right? Like, elaborate. What did that training entail? How many hours did you have actually exercising or performing that activity? And what did you learn from it, right? And of course, on a resume, you have to be mindful of time, how much content you put, because you don't want a 15-page resume to submit, because those rarely make it to the top of the pile, right? But it's really about thinking uh, thinking more about the experience you had versus hoping that I did, ransomware containment training, right? No, what did you do? You worked in a simulated environment where you had to apply your knowledge in a hands-on way to contain and eradicate a ransomware attack, right? Like, it's all about, and I think that's something just universally as cyber professionals, we all need to get better about, is being better being better at marketing ourselves, right? Don't sell yourself short. The things you've done, even outside of a professional environment, whether it be volunteer work in your local community or volunteer work at your university, or whatever the case may be, any time that you're applying those skills and that knowledge that you've learned and obtained in the cyber realm to something that's, tangible, that you've done yourself, that's experience, right? It doesn't always have to be, well, I don't have any, corporate experience because I haven't gotten that first job yet, but I've done all these other things. Talk about it, brag about yourself. Don't be ashamed. Don't be afraid to elaborate on the things you've done that qualifies as experience. That's one of the things I love to see as a hiring manager, is not just I have Sec Plus, I have this, I have that. No, like, I volunteered at my local high school and talked to students about cybersecurity, or I worked with my church in my community to help them with their IT infrastructure, or whatever the case may be. It's all experience and it all counts. We just need to, as a cyber family, right? We just need to be better about marketing ourselves and the skills that we have. I hope
I
that
think
hope
with
that
that too, it's
answers.
not to be afraid of like talking about the hours you spent in this. I
Yes.
had
Yeah.
it was funny. I had a student I was talking to at a university, I don't know, it was probably like 3 weeks ago or whatever. And they were kind of like, I was asking them for feedback and what they thought. They were giving me some feedback on like things they'd like to see, new challenges and stuff. They're like, yeah, I'm kind of bored with it now. I'm like, what are you talking about? You're bored with it? I'm like, there's hundreds and hundreds of exercises. And you're like, Yeah, I've done them all. I'm like, what are you talking about? You've done them all. I'm like, no, I did them all. I'm like, I don't know what that is in terms of hours, but it's got to be well north of 1,000 hours. I'm like, why are you not talking about that in your resume? Like, that's unbelievably powerful to be able to have this bench knowledge of all these different scenarios. And, in a good way, it was kind of, as a new CEO stepping into Cyberbit, it was kind of an interesting, okay, this is a high class problem I want to solve for you. Let me get you some more content to play with if you're willing to go through all of it, right? Um, but the other thing that kind of comes into this, and let me pivot a little bit here. There's a great question from Chad. We're rapidly getting into an AI world here, right? And AI is coming at us both from the good guys and the bad guys. Jess, any opinions here on how AI changes cybersecurity training and what types of things we need to think about as AI rolls into this?
Well, I mean, AI again, yeah, is multifaceted. I think people think immediately of generative AI creating better phishing emails, but guess what? You still need some of the same skills you would if it was a regular phishing email sent there, right? You need to be able to use the tools in your organization to understand whether this has been spoofed, whether this is part of an account takeover. You need to really understand how to do detection and response with the tools that you have. So I think, AI gets overblown in that capacity, but the benefits of AI are there. Certainly, when you look at things like assistance being built into detection and response technology, you need to start getting good at and building your skills around things like prompt engineering. You have to learn how to ask the right questions, but that doesn't mean that you can come in off the street and start asking the right questions if you have no experience with basic, security fundamentals. So it's a build, right? AI is going to be incredible as an accelerant to folks that already have baseline security knowledge, but it isn't going to propel someone that doesn't have that experience, in my opinion. And James, of course, I would love to hear what you have to say about this as well, into a senior level position. I think in terms of training, security and training platforms, the ability to use AI to customize career paths and to customize learning paths is fantastic. Learning from what people are doing, seeing where their gaps are, and then suggesting new training courses and labs for them to do, I think is excellent. And it keeps the administrators of those tools from having to spend all that time building those things manually. And also it really helps pull from the latest headlines and start, developing content and scenarios quickly for skills and training platforms. So when I'm looking at those, I like to see that as part of the roadmap or the strategy for how AI can be used as actually part of the product itself.
Excellent. James, what do you think about AI? What's your opinion on how this starts to evolve and impact training?
That's a rabbit hole.
It sure is, but that's why I'm asking you.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is you can't be afraid of it, right? It's here. It's going to continue to be here. And to Jess's point, we can't just focus on the negatives or how the adversary's using it, right? We have to be able to adapt it to our uses as well, right? And I love the concept of leveraging it in a way to help kind of do a lot of that analytical work on the back end to help improve skills and training expectations and opportunities. And I'm looking at like a major events that happen in the news, and I'm pretty sure Cyberbit does this, but flavor of the month, right? Like these big things happen. Now here's how you could go practice this, right? If it were to happen to you, and again, hoping it doesn't, right? But it's just AI, whether it's generative AI or just AI in general, or LLM, large language models, whatever the case may be, it can't be ignored. And to Jess's point, there's got to be consideration of how it can be used on the defensive side to increase our capabilities, right? But my biggest piece of feedback for anybody diving into those unsure waters of AI, don't be afraid. I mean, you're going to have to face it sooner or later. Just do it cautiously, and don't ignore it, because it's not going anywhere.
Well, I think just kind of one final comment on that, and then we'll wrap up here is, The other thing to keep in mind with cybersecurity education is we're using AI to help build out scenarios, to help build out fictitious environments. Like, it's early in that process, but I will say that, you can already see the efficiency improvement that that's going to provide us in the long term, not only for, kind of just creating more content and doing it more efficiently, but also for really adapting and translating something that might be happening right now in the real world into a cyber range so we can start exercising it right away. So, I'd say we're all still a little ways away from that, but there's a bunch to come. Now we're going to have a survey here in the end. I'd just like to ask everybody to please fill that out. That's super helpful for us. And I just want to thank James and Jess for joining us today. Hopefully you got a lot out of it. If you have other questions, we'd be happy to answer those, and you certainly know how to get a hold of us. So again, I'm Caleb Barlow from Cyberbit. Thank you all for your time and for joining us for an hour today.